This Hangout on Air is live. Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday night. Happy midsummer. Happy lots of things. Happy 40th birthday to me this week, which is part of the reason that you notice a special guest here. Cecil Lammy is on assignment, so I'm driving the train here tonight. We've got Gene Bramall. We've got Matt Waldman. And tonight, you may notice, and with the flashing strobe light, I'm going to go be hanging out with our man Fiveish later on tonight, and it looks like there's like a rave or a party that I definitely want to be a part of.
Is that better? Well, it's going to get it'll definitely.
I liked it better with the red light personally, but so yes, that is down there, folks, and you may see him popping up. Football guys at red light. Football guys. Audible royalty, Mr. Jeff Rosenberger, better known as Fiveish, and I feel like he knows us better than we know ourselves. So I wonder if this is going to be like almost like an extended on the couch edition. But we've got Jeff. It's awesome, and Jeff is, listen to this, folks. Jeff is driving across the country right now, and he's passing through Austin, Texas. We're going to hang out and tip some beers back tonight, but I figured this is a perfect occasion to have Jeff in, since we have an extra spot in the booth with Cecil on assignment. Let's jump in. And, of course, we will start with the news, 4th of July. Oh, Jason Pierre-Paul. Oh, man. So, Gene, first, give us the unmitigated, real information that we can tell at this point. And then, of course, this is going to intersect with your defensive expertise on how this could affect Pierre-Paul this year.
Yeah, where do you want to start? I mean, there's so many layers to this story. It seemed like it got strange and then not so strange and then pretty strange again. I think what we know is that he obviously had a very significant injury to his hand. When you talk about fractures in the thumb and injury so significant to the index finger that the entire finger and the bone behind the finger all the way in the hand needed to be amputated, you're talking about a significant injury. And yes, the understanding is that by amputating that finger, he's expected to recover a little bit sooner. But when there's that much damage to that area, there's going to be damage to surrounding tissue, and we're hearing that it's a minimum of 6 weeks before the thumb heals. But there are skin grafts involved. He's been rumored to have multiple surgeries, and that probably involves cleaning the hand, removing some of the tissue that wasn't going to survive from other parts of the hand. We were told that the palm was involved, maybe a couple of other fingers were involved. So, what we're hearing right now is 6 weeks for the thumb to heal, and that the amputation incisions will have healed by then. But I would not put any money on Jason Pierre-Paul being ready to go within 6 or 7 weeks. It's definitely going to be longer than that.
And isn't this basically going to be like this year, at least, piecing together what we have, that it's almost like he's going to be playing with the club on one hand? I mean, is that hand going to be effective at all from what we can speculate, knowing his injuries?
If the only thing that needed to heal was the amputation scar, he would have some limitations as he learned how to play without his index finger. Now, you'll hear there are Dr. Markadikis from ESPN, and we saw Dr. David Chow talk about how much of the grip strength might be lost. It's going to be somewhere on the order of 20 to 25%, and that's significant, but it's really the outside part of the hand and the thumb that make the primary part of your grip. So what's really going to matter here is how much damage he has to his palm and how much damage those fractures were in his thumb. So if there really wasn't that much going on there, and from what we saw from Adam Schefter's tweet of the medical record, from what I can tell, where the skin graft was placed on Wednesday was somewhere on his wrist. If he's not having any skin grafting to his other fingers or his palm, then maybe it is just a matter of healing up the fractures in the thumb and allowing that amputation area to heal. And once that's able to recover and he gets some of his strength back and he learns to adapt to that, yes, maybe it's not that much different than playing with a club in terms of, we've seen Patrick Willis and other linebackers be able to tackle and shed blocks with a broken hand that had a splint and a club over the top of it. But that's a lot of speculation, and I think, again, if there's so much going on that you have to have a finger amputated and the neck and the thumb repaired, then you have to think that there's more injuries there. It's not a good situation.
And Pierre-Paul's camp's behavior in not allowing them to see him, definitely something that, it puts off the alarm bells. So, Matt, larger discussion here, and we might not necessarily say that JPP was the linchpin of this defense, but if he's not the force that he usually is, it affects this defense. And I want to just open up the floor to a larger discussion of how the quality of the defense affects the fantasy value of the offensive players. If this were, say, to make the Giants' defense 10% less effective because he's 40% less effective or something, just pulling numbers out of the air, Matt, does this make you reconsider close calls between, say, Odell Beckham and Demaryius Thomas, or looking closer at Eli Manning, or looking closer at Shane Vereen and more shootouts? How much do you factor in the quality of the defense when you're determining fantasy value?
I think it factors in with a running game if you're looking at a power running game. So, Rashad Jennings would be the type of player that you would probably want to look at and reconsider if you thought him to be a really great value and potentially a feature back who was going to get a lot of carries. You'd have to, reevaluate that carry count somewhat because of the fact that maybe this team and the game script is going to force them to play from behind. And then that's really the situation that I would be a little bit more wary, because there are some teams that I think people expect that the running back is going to get a number of carries, but if you look at the defense, the quality of the defense, I think San Francisco is a good example. If you look at Carlos Hyde, and you see what they lost not only on their offensive line with Mike Iupati gone, but then you look at the series of retirements that they've had on the defensive side of the football, and the fact that Colin Kaepernick is trying to reinvent his game in one offseason with Kurt Warner helping him out. You look at those scenarios and wonder to yourself, is this team going to be playing from behind an awful lot? Because you don't have Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman's coming back from injury, Eric Reed's retired, Chris Borland retired, and then you have Smith, Jason Smith, you have Smith retired too. You look at that and you're thinking, let's see, major part of club leadership and skill all out the window in one off season, and that can be a major impact. So I think when you look at that, that's where I would tailor it downward. Tailoring it upward, sure, certainly when it's from playing from behind, you can look at the wide receivers and assume that they're going to get some higher touches there, more opportunities, and you can probably dial that up a little bit. And even if it's a couple of targets more per game, that's still a significant amount that you would want to factor into projections.
Yeah, well, those are the razor's edge, nitpicky things that we use to sort out players within tiers. Okay, Fiveish, Jeff, come back to us. I know.
It's got the Kenny Rogers roasters thing going on from the Seinfeld episode.
Totally. I can't wait to see. I know where this La Quinta is, and I'm not aware of. If you go a little further down the road by the airport, there are a few shady, seedy places, but maybe we'll have to turn it into one. So first, I got to ask you, Jeff.
Yes,
you're traveling across the country from Florida. This
Correct.
JPP fireworks accident happened in Florida.
Yes.
Is there any attention paid to fireworks safety at all? Is this not that unusual? It is Florida.
Not at all. As you like to say, avoid Florida. Hashtag avoid Florida. Yeah, that fits. When this went down, I kind of caught the tail end of it because we were in move mode.
Yeah.
So until Gene explained exactly what had happened, I had heard everything from the fact that it was no big deal to he didn't have a hand anymore.
Right.
So I didn't realize how severe it was. But no, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. Not even a little.
We're all learning. Yeah, it is. The Florida part of that story was essential. But
right.
going back to the defenses, because we've got among many connections, and I just got to say, to me, having Fiveish on is about our community and how our community. It'll sound cheesy for me to say, like, y'all are like in the booth with us, but this is one of the best people I could ever imagine, because you're like our archivist. Jeff, seriously, you're like our archivist, or like you have. It's silly that I always say don't encourage us. You encourage us so much. So, but I want to ask you.
Yeah, it's like the leg lamp in the Christmas story.
Yeah. No, but seriously though, we've talked, in addition to talking the show and everything like that, fantasy football off the record, lots of emails and DMs and things back and forth about our teams, and of course we share the Steelers, our love of the Steelers. How much does it make you like Steelers plays in fantasy drafts this year, that our beloved Steelers defense is the Achilles heel of the team?
It really depends, because I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of a guy who never really tries to draft Steelers that much, because I have to root against them or for them, and you know how that gets. It
bad juju. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have enough stress on Sundays as it is, so I don't need to add to it. Obviously, it should be great for the offensive guys.
Yeah.
Because it's probably going to be a whole lot of shootouts. So, I mean, I'd be lapping up Le'Veon Bell everywhere I can get him where people are letting him drop because of that suspension. That's not scaring me away.
And I'm finding myself drawn more to Martavis Bryant, too. I think that he fits into that upside, the 30. I know. And it's funny because Waldman you were the true believer about Le'Veon Bell. What's going on that Matt Waldman is the one telling us to stay the course? And
I just love the fact that I just love bashing you Steeler guys.
Well,
Even, in tribute to the snake.
Yeah, I meant to mention that.
In tribute to the snake, I mean, just to tick off you Steeler fans a little bit more, I mean, they should have been called the Snakes for that play that kept him out of the Super Bowl. So anyway, I know my buddy Gene in the old AFC Central will attest that we kind of enjoy every moment we can to rib you guys for greatness.
It is. Matt Williamson, friend of the show, had tweeted out or put on Facebook tonight. As a kid growing up, he learned that the biggest rival of the Steelers was not a division rival; it was the Raiders. And
Correct.
And I hope you did get to see, Matt, that photo of my son trying to rip the ball out of Franco's hands in the Pittsburgh International Airport.
I did. I almost commented in your Facebook thread that it was that childlike innocence to know that was just wrong.
Wrong, right?
It was just wrong. He knew it. You could see it.
He was trying to strip the ball from Franco's hands, and it just wasn't going to happen. And really, folks, if you're ever flying out of Pittsburgh, you got to stop and check that out. That shows you how integral it is to the Steelers' identity and the city's identity. Okay, Gene, if it's a Thursday night show and it's the off season, we got to talk about Victor Cruz. And the news this week is he might not be on the PUP to start camp. And we saw a sort of similar news around this time last year, maybe not quite this far from camp, about Rob Gronkowski, and it did end up being a positive. It was the first big positive we were looking for, and while it did take him 3 or 4 weeks to look like himself, by week 3, 4, 5, he looked like himself and produced like himself for the rest of the season. It was very important. How much of a chance is there that Cruz could follow a similar path, or is the injuries being different enough? Are we revising what we think about Ruben Randall now, or even the whole Giants offense as they're getting good news on one side of the ball, bad news on the other?
It's a totally different set of injuries. Big tendon injury like a patellar tendon injury, as we've said all off-season, is probably the worst thing that you could have. Victor Cruz is entering his, I guess we can still probably call this his age 28 season. He'll be turning 29 in November. I suppose it's possible he doesn't start camp on PUP, but if the plan, and it seems like the beat writer that advanced this feels like the plan would be for him to just participate in one preseason game, I don't think it makes much sense for them to do anything other than put him on the PUP list until they're absolutely certain that he's going to be able to participate in enough camp practices and enough team drills for that to be worthwhile. As it was for Rob Gronkowski last year, as it's been for Julio Jones and other players in the past, as you said, whenever there's any mention of PUP, with a significant injury like this, if the player doesn't go on PUP, then it has to be seen as a very strong sign. I still think there's two things that we're watching for Cruz here. One, when is he ready to participate in those camp practices? And two, how does he perform in those first couple of weeks? I don't care whether he plays in a preseason game or not, but it would be nice to see that they don't have to manage his practice reps and he can go more than 1 or 2 or even 3 consecutive practices in a row. But most importantly, that he doesn't have any swelling in that knee or any compensatory reconditioning injuries in the hamstring, the quad, the calf, whatever it may be, as he tries to show that he's ready to come back. We've heard 75%, 80%. It's not that difficult to get from 40 to 80% or 80 to 90%. It's those last few percentage points, whatever that means to these elite athletes, that makes the difference here. Victor Cruz at 90 to 92% probably is not going to be good enough, and we've seen that from Ryan Williams. We've seen it from many other guys who seem like they're just, they're close enough to make a practice squad or be in the mix for a roster spot, but they really haven't recovered fully yet. It's not been the case with Achilles injuries, but it certainly has been the case with patellar tendons. So good sign if he stays off PUP. Even better sign if in those first couple of weeks he's making enough progress where they're ready to get him into a pretty early preseason game.
Yeah, and as you said, it may not be that Victor Cruz is able to return to Victor Cruz status, and it may not be about Victor Cruz's value, but if he's able to play, even if he can't be up to his old levels, then it could affect the value of guys like Larry Donnell and Ruben Randall. This leads into, and you mentioned it, and this is heartbreaking, and we've shed a few tears, or figurative tears, and otherwise poured one out for the career of Marcus Lattimore on this show. And what a very interesting piece came out this week on Lattimore. I highly recommend everybody to check it out on SB Nation, written by Jason Buckland. Really, really excellent article about the nature of his injury and his life after that. And what's interesting is he indicates that he was shocked that the Niners drafted him, and that really there was not much of a chance that he was going to play at the time that they knew. And Gene, some of the new information that was shared in this article was, in addition to the 3 of the 4 major ligaments holding the joint together, the ACL, LCL, and PCL, his knee was dislodged and had come in contact with an artery or nerve that, if the nerve had been severed, they would have had to take, speaking of amputation, he was that close to that. And he said that he got to that point. This goes right into what you were saying, where his knee just wasn't responding the way that he expected it to. That he said his knee just wasn't suited to play football anymore. He could tell. And when he thought that to himself, he said he was faking it the whole time to convince himself he was still improving. And this article is really excellent, getting into everything that came from there. How does when we find out, rarely, Gene, do we get to hear that kind of candid information of a situation like that? And, how does that enhance, in hindsight, your understanding of what was going on with Lattimore? Are there any other situations that come to mind, like even this Victor Cruz situation? Because it was an equally horrific injury as far as the way it chilled everybody on the scene. Like, people on the field were like, whoa, this isn't a garden variety serious football injury. This is something different. Tell me how this Lattimore news fits for you.
Well, I think it just goes to show lots of different things about what when we talk about high-level athletes talking themselves into recovery, they recognize that, Adrian Peterson recovering from an ACL injury is not the norm. When you hear Dr. James Andrews say that, his cartilage looked like the cartilage of a baby's when he went in there, that's not normal. Recovery from these traumatic injuries is advancing at breakneck paces, but it's still significant injuries, and it's those last few percentage points really that make a big difference. And Lattimore's injury was, we compared it to Willis McGahee at the time, and and other similar, Napoleon McCallum's, those sorts of injuries. When you start talking about knees that are damaged to the point where you're concerned about function of nerves and viability of blood vessels, then there's going to be it's something that's really difficult to come back from. But it also, to me, something that you mentioned in that article just as we started, struck a chord for me, was that, the scouts and the position coaches praised him for how he was going through drills. And we talk about these guys, Victor Cruz, 75-80% going through these drills. It's not the same thing as putting yourself in a football type environment where you don't know exactly where the hit is coming from and when and what body position you're going to be in. And when you have these major joint injuries that affect ligaments and tendons and blood vessels and nerves, it takes time for those things to recover to the point where your body consciously and subconsciously trusts them and is able to perform as it did before the injuries. And yes, Willis McGahee was able to recover. Napoleon McCallum was not, and Marcus Lattimore wasn't either. And even though he looked like he was capable as he was doing those individual drills, we knew it was going to be a difficult injury to recover from. We didn't really know exactly where he stood at the time, but that's something to remember. Is one, don't overestimate how much an NFL player who is seeing his dream possibly taken away from him will talk himself into feeling better than he does, and don't overreact to these situations where a player looks great in individual drills. Yes, sometimes Adrian Peterson beating out Percy Harvin in a sprint uphill is meaningful, but other times, Victor Cruz running routes at 80 to 85% over the past month may not be meaningful. So hopefully it is, and hopefully Victor Cruz recovers, whereas those before him did not, and Marcus Lattimore did not. But don't read too much into these situations until we see proof of it actually happening on the field.
And the article gets into some details that are a bit chilling for us trying to match up public reports to what's going on. And this is where someone like Gene Bramall is essential, because I can't tell you how many times Gene will parse what a coach says and take the information that we know objectively is true and say that just can't be. Because Lattimore says that in October, while there were some pieces run that maybe he could be on the active roster by the end of the year, he had been hiding from the team that he had known that he wasn't really going to be back. He didn't tell anybody on the 49ers about his doubts. And he was even taking oxycodone without their knowledge to try just to do something for his knee. But the whole time, he knew that it wasn't going to happen, or he had strong, close to certainty, and the team and pieces were being run from beat writers saying, "Oh, Lattimore's getting closer to return," when it wasn't really going to happen. So, I hate to put those two things together, but mainly it's just to draw attention to the Lattimore piece. Matt, you're always taking the big picture view. When you have an actual candid account of a story like this behind the scenes, what do you get from it?
Well, I mean, this whole thing is very curious to me anyhow, because when the fact that scouts are praising him and we're hearing the whole media machine, it just tells you that there's a couple of things we need to understand. There are good beat writers out there. There's also a huge number of new football writers out there, and a lot of them aren't all that good. And also fans sometimes read in way too much about what they get when they look at what people have to say about a player. When I love the fact that Gene spent this time talking about the difference between 70 and 80% and what the real percentage needs to be. And if you need to go back and rewind and listen to that section again, you should, because when you talk about the best of the best, we're not talking about 70 or 80%. We're talking the difference between 95% maybe at college to 99 to 99.99%. We're really talking about that last 2 to 3 percentage points. And that may be generous. You may be looking at really the decimal points of that 99%. That really is the difference between a good NFL player and a guy who isn't playing in the league anymore. And to say that they're 70 to 80%, I mean, again, it's not accurate enough, and I'm being nitpicky about this, but when I hear 78, 80%, when I think literally about what that really means, I'm thinking this guy can't even play in semi-pro football right
exactly.
now. If I'm thinking this guy's at 95%, I'm thinking, oh, well, he's got a shot to maybe make the roster. He could probably play in the Canadian League,
right.
Because depending on the position. Because this brings me to a guy that I'd like to ask you both about, especially Gene, because, and I don't know if you've kept up with him or not, but Robert Edwards is a guy that reminds me of a player who also came very close to having his leg amputated, and the nerve in his knee got stretched out in a way that apparently he had issues with feeling the bottom of his foot when he walked at times, and it took him 4 years to recover from his Rookie of the Year season with the Patriots to where he was playing again with Miami, and he had 20 carries in that season, averaged over 5 yards per carry, had a couple of touchdowns, and split duties with Travis Minor, and then one comeback player of the year, but no team would touch him. The Dolphins cut him after that. The Saints gave him a tryout. But he ended up playing in the Canadian League for another 4 years. He had 2 straight 1,200-yard seasons, or 1,100-yard seasons as a starter, and had combined 1,400-yard seasons those 2 years. And yes, it's a wider field. Probably means that you can run a little bit more with open space in ways that you may not in the NFL, and the cutting may not be as difficult. But you still have to be a pretty darn good athlete and still play at a level where I think you got to be at 95, 97, 98%. So I guess my question to you is, this is a great example of a guy who, do you think NFL teams were scared of the idea of playing him, and they just gave him a label and shut him down when he actually could because they just didn't believe it was going to happen? I mean, because that's almost like the opposite of the Lattimore thing.
Right. Well, I'll say this, but I want to hear what Gene has to say more than myself. I think that the story you tell is a good one, just to add to what you were saying about the difference between 95 and 98 or 99% being everything. And if a player's at 70 or 80%, that means in terms of really getting all the way back to NFL football shape, they're like 5% of the way, because it's that last 20-25% that really matters. But Gene, you may have more insight into Robert Edwards' specific injury and how it went after that.
I don't have too much more insight other than to say that there's probably something in his medical record and his imaging in the physical exam that suggests that he was unlikely, even though he ended up maybe doing so for a couple of years, 3 to 4 years in the CFL, that he wasn't likely to stand up to what he was going to be facing in the NFL. But let's go back to this percentage thing for just a little bit, because, yeah, I do think there's a difference between 75, 80, 90, 95, 100. But I would also take this from this discussion, just throw out the percentages altogether. It really means nothing to me when Victor Cruz says 70%, 75, and now 80. It doesn't mean much to me that Le'Veon Bell says he's 95% recovered. All it says to me is that that particular player does not feel like he's in full form yet. And then you go back and decide, well, what does that mean? Does that have something to do with the type of injury? Does that mean he's had a setback in his recovery? Is this likely to be a long-term thing where that's his new baseline? But that, as I've been saying about Victor Cruz for a month, 2 months now, that percentage really should not mean much other than to recognize that the player is telling you he's not ready to play yet. And when somebody, have a sense of what you would tell folks about what percentage you are. You wake up with a headache, well, I'm only such and such percent today, and know what a throwaway comment that is. It's not that much more precise in an NFL athlete, and it's really not that much more precise even if we were to hear it from Andrews or any of these high-profile surgeons. What I like to hear, what tells me more is, as we've heard with Todd Gurley, well, we think he's 4 to 6 weeks ahead of his rehab schedule. That means more to me than hearing that Todd Gurley is 80 to 85%. So take the percentages for what they are, which is nothing more than saying I'm not 100%.
Gene, the one question I do have for you to follow up with Victor Cruz is, looking at his fantasy prospects, to me, based on what I'm reading and what you're talking about, it sounds to me like I'm not worried about the fact that he's going to have any swelling. Doesn't sound like he has that. If he's avoiding the pup, it doesn't look like he's going to experience any of these compensatory injuries that you're talking about. But to me, all this says to me is what I want to hear is he explosive again? Because if you didn't make the pup, that just means that you're not having issues where you need rest and where you need to be off the leg. But does that mean the leg's responding, or does it just mean that, he's going through the motions and he can jog through a route pretty well, he can run at a 3/4 speed pretty well, but he's never going to be able to beat an NFL cornerback off press coverage again, who is worth their salt?
Absolutely correct. The last phase of his rehab and the last test he has to pass to become an NFL player has not happened yet. He can do individual drills on the side at full speed, but until he's out there in a game situation and pads, you don't know how explosive he is. You don't know how he'll respond from play to play and snap to snap, and you don't know how he'll recover from week to week. Maybe the key with Lattimore is he was probably close to being on the active roster. From a health standpoint, he was as healthy as he was going to get. But that wasn't going to be good enough. Victor Cruz may be as close to fully healthy as he's going to get, but that may not be good enough to do what he used to do on a football field. I hope that it is. There's no way to say, I can't tell you right now that there's no chance that that'll happen. But until we see it happen, until we see him look close to the old salsa dancing Victor Cruz from the slot, I think you can't put any stock in. All we can say right now is you're correct. He has not had a setback in his rehab and recovery. But that rehab and recovery is not complete yet.
Yes, very sobering words, always. That's the flip side, because I always say Gene Bramwell brought to you by Xanax, but sometimes the Xanax isn't to make you feel more calm, it's to make you less excited. That's the wet blanket brought to you by Matt Waldman. Okay, Jeff, let's get you back in here. Let's pipe you back in.
Yes.
Everybody, Jeff Rosenberger, everybody, Fiveish, archivist, graphic designer, idea man, really the hidden weapon, the secret weapon of the Audible, and somebody. Now you drove through Lafayette, Louisiana today, correct?
I did.
Ladarius Green went to Louisiana Lafayette. So when I say the name Ladarius Green, now big news over the past week. Antonio Gates suspended for the first 4 games.
Correct.
How excited does that make you to take a chance on Ladarius Green this year?
Not as excited as it would have if it had happened last season when I still owned him in about 3 dynasties.
Yeah.
I don't know, and we've seen so little from him, at least for me, and I don't break tape down as much as you guys do, and I only get to see him play when I have the opportunity to see San Diego play primetime or something like that, since I'm not a West Coaster yet. So, I mean, I've seen so little of him since he's come into the league because, we keep hearing all this stuff about him, and Gates just keeps going. I mean, he's like the Energizer Bunny. So, I mean, he's looked good when we've seen him in, little spurts. So, I mean, I guess if I owned him, I'd be cautiously optimistic. I guess at least he's going to get a chance to show what he's got now. He doesn't have anybody standing in his way.
Exactly, he gets that chance. And I think, Matt, that Jeff articulated something that is maybe a bit of a worry on one hand if you want to invest in Green, but as somebody who has Gates and a lot of MFL 10s, it is the opposite worry for me. It's the weight of that relationship, Rivers to Gates. It's the weight of what Gates has done for the Chargers and how it has kept Ladarius Green, despite all the promise and so on, from getting that shot on the field. We have seen so little of him. Now, I believe that Green he is capable of performing strongly enough to make the Chargers rethink how they are planning on deploying these tight ends, and then therefore making what we do have in Gates when he returns not what we thought we were going to have. Now, that being said, if I recall correctly, Matt, you were one of the people saying, don't write Antonio Gates off yet. Come on, why is everybody moving on from Antonio Gates? So should we employ that again and say, hey, no matter what Ladarius Green does when Antonio Gates comes back, he's still that we've seen as a big piece of this offense?
Ozzie Newsome played football until basically he begged his way off the 1995 Cleveland Browns, and they made him a coach because they didn't want to get him off the field. And let's see, Tony Gonzalez was long done since he left the Kansas City Chiefs, but continued to put up great fantasy numbers in Atlanta. Jason Witten is old and decrepit, but somehow he's still keeping the San Diego State tight end Escobar off on the bench, or whoever else they try and bring in to challenge him. So yeah, you get my point. And I think that the thing is with Antonio Gates, Phillip Rivers, they are the type of pairing where Rivers throws the ball in a spot where his receiver can make a play on it in tight coverage. That's why Stevie Johnson is saying in the media right now, I wish I had a chance to play with this kind of quarterback at the height of my career, because Stevie Johnson was a bad ball catcher, a tight coverage, I'm going to win the ball in tight spaces player, and he didn't have a quarterback who had the accuracy or the guts to throw the ball the way that Phillip Rivers does. And so with Gates, that benefits a player like him who can be a rebounder that he was, before he, became an NFL type of rebounder. What I think it may change is if Ladarius Green actually performs well enough that they can't take him off the field, then it may make them rethink what they do with Danny Woodhead. It may make them rethink what they do with their second outside receiver, and whether or not they put Green as an outside option or Gates as an outside option and put the other one at the line and have to employ 2 tight ends at one time, as opposed to necessarily saying, well, we've got to keep Gates on the bench here. Because I'm not sure that that's likely to happen, because Malcolm Floyd didn't do all that great last year compared to what he's done in previous years. Keenan Allen disappointed last year because he was banged up in a couple of different ways. At least that's the party line right now. We'll see what happens if he doesn't respond this year and follow up on his good rookie year. They may just feel like we've got to put our best weapons on the field. What we have to count on, though, is the very thing that we talk about every week is, are the coaches aware enough, intelligent enough, and skilled enough to make that actionable on a consistent basis, so that what we see and do as armchair quarterbacks and coaches can actually translate into reality.
It is tough, and that's the thing. And what fascinates me especially is that Green is playing for his second contract. These 4 games is his opportunity to show the league what he's capable of. And hey, a big fast, pass-catching tight end is a fetishized object in the NFL right now. I mean, look what Jared Cook got in free agency. Look what Lance Kendricks just got. So if Ladarius Green does just enough to catch the eye of other teams, he will be a coveted player. But, Gene, like me, you approach rankings from a tier point of view. So when we look at Gates, it's one thing when you say, okay, Le'Veon Bell's going to miss 3 games, but he was already running back 1, and may it be a question of how much the gap is smaller. Even Tom Brady, you may have as a top 5 or 7 quarterback and say, okay, he's going to miss 4 games, but you know the value of that. With Gates, it may not be quite as easy. How do you quantify this? Do you move Gates down a tier or more even, maybe even move him into close to undraftable because of the opportunity cost of the 4 weeks missed and the waiver wire opportunities, and the possibility that when he returns, the role might be smaller than envisioned?
Yeah, I think you have to move him down for all of those reasons. How much you move him down probably has more to do with how wide you thought that particular tier he was in. If you think that the second tier, or I guess, since we're putting Gronkowski in a tier all by himself, if you think that third tier, thinking that Graham and Kelsey are probably the second tier by themselves, if you think that third tier includes 10 to 12 names, then you're not moving him down more than a tier. You'll just drop to the bottom of that big tier and take the best player available when it comes to you. But if you think he fits more in the, Olsen, Walker, I don't know who else you'd put in that tier at this point. Allen, Witten, Cameron, those sorts of guys. If you feel like he fits in that 4 to 7 range, then yeah, I think you drop him out of that tier altogether for all the reasons you talked about: the age, the injury risk, the fact that Ladarius Green may be doing a little bit more. I think that's what you'll need to do. But I don't think there's any question this is a totally different situation than what you're facing with Le'Veon Bell.
And I would even go as far as to say, and you guys can tell me whether this is too aggressive or not, I would say you draft Green ahead of Gates at this point, because you're going to know you have a startable player for the first 4 weeks. You'll know what you have in those first 4 weeks, and if he comes out and fizzles, then so what? You use that roster spot on somebody that's getting hot in free agency, waiver wire. But every week you wait for Gates. Is a week you missed opportunity, and he was already a big up and down swing player last year. It wasn't like he was a plug and play player like a Brady, who it makes it a little bit easier to stomach that. And a really interesting proposition, I want to touch on really quickly, and listen to the couch this week or recorded this morning, David Dodds, and he brought up something really fascinating, and I just want to throw this idea out there and hear what each of you have to say about it. He said that there was somebody in one of his leagues who strictly drafted on the first 6 weeks. He weighted the draft dominator to basically I only care about the first 6 weeks. I want to get off to a 5-1 or 6-0 start. I want to look at the schedule strength and otherwise players that can get off to that hot start. And then I'll worry about the other 7 weeks when we get there. And it struck me that this might be a much more realistic way to draft. And I brought up, Matt, your 4 legs of the fantasy football table and how, well, you have the other 3 legs that kick in to help you. The draft is to launch you, but the navigation is those other 3 things. So why wouldn't you narrow your focus like that? Matt, when I throw this idea up that David brought up, what does it make you think?
I think it's a great idea in theory. I'm just curious about the execution of it, because it's a situation where what exactly are you accounting for that feels like a fail-safe situation in those 6 weeks? Because if it doesn't, then you go 2 and 4, or you go, right. What then? I mean, where are you looking there? Because if you've drafted just for that time, but at the same time, I can see how you have to know yourself as an owner and realize if you're doing that, then you feel confident in your waiver wire management, and you feel confident in your ability to make trades, or you're in a league where that's going to happen. And
timing those trades is so important. One of the things Dodge brought up is you pick somebody who gets off to a hot start, and then you trade them.
Yeah, and you've got to do that, and people won't do that. And trades are one of the most difficult things to do. And I mean, I've written articles about that. I've written some this year, and even with those, I start off, and I say this for most people because it's true. If you can avoid trading, do so, because that's really the last. To me, that's the last leg of the table. You can build a good three-legged table, and as I told Bob, as I told Bob Harris, I said I like to use that fourth leg to beat the other owners over the head with, and that's the trade. And if I don't need to use it, that's fine. But if I need to, and I need to have that nail sticking out of it so that I can use it that way, that's even better. But that I don't really want it supporting my table, because usually most people overestimate their ability to trade. And as Matt Harmon and I had a discussion on Twitter recently about it, Matt's like, yeah, because I see so many articles, people go, oh, well, if you get this guy and he starts, well, then you just trade him. It's like, and Matt's like, it's almost like this lazy analysis where it's like, well, nobody else in your league is actually reading fantasy analysis or keeping up and really studying these players either, and we're not having up-to-the-minute coverage everywhere in the frickin' fantasy football world to not understand this. So I think that it does make sense to understand that you should be cautious about your trades and should be really honest about how good you are at that skill. And if you are not consistently getting the better end of the deal against your competition year after year, or you're not facing the same guys year after year to be able to know your league and understand how this works, I'm more of the type of person to understand that maybe trading should be your last case scenario. It should be the last thing that you should be trying to do. Doesn't mean you shouldn't get better at it, but it shouldn't be the type of thing that you look at and go, oh yeah, I'm going to use that. Now, the guy like Dodds, I think Dodds is a perfect example of a personality and a guy with his intellect and his ability to and enjoyment of wheeling and dealing would be a good type of owner to be able to do the trade thing and make that a more sturdy component of the way that he does his work. But you have to understand yourself and not have any delusions. You can't be that person who thinks that you look at that ad in the men's magazine or the women's magazine, whoever you are out there, and go, that would look good on me. And then you go and try that thing on, and it looks, and your partner looks at you and goes, right. Yeah, no.
Where's the receipt? Save the receipt.
Yeah,
Save the receipt from this experiment, right? No, and you're right that Dodds is exactly the kind of personality that would see it through. Because if you're going to try an experiment like this, you really have to see it through. But there are some aspects to it. Now, obviously, you're going to be basing it a bit off of it projecting the strength of defenses. And, Gene, you can talk about that and how much we should really expect. How often does it happen that a great defense becomes a subpar defense, or a subpar defense becomes great in the course of one offseason? Because that's a component to this. Because what the Draft Dominator, the mobile Draft Dominator do is they allow you to weight projections for, or maybe you want just a team that's going to dominate in the playoffs, right? You just say, all I care about is weeks 14 to 16. You can do that, but like Matt said, you may try to follow through on this and say, what have I done? So one of the things is the schedule strength, and it's based a bit on last year. But there's some other angles here, like I think players like Rashad Jennings, Arian Foster, Jonathan Stewart, players that you look at and say, I'm worried about their injury-prone nature over the course of a year. When you're narrowing your focus to 6 weeks, it's easier to say, hey, get me off to that hot start, and then if you haven't got hurt yet, again, if you have the nerve to pull it off, you trade him. What do you? How does this whole idea strike you, Gene?
It strikes me as I have three big questions about this. First, so what are we correcting for? What are we accounting for? What are we prioritizing when we say we want to focus on the first 6 weeks? Are we saying strength of schedule? Well, we just had a huge discussion about how difficult daily fantasy can be in the first 6 weeks because we don't know how teams are going to approach their offense. We don't know how defenses might change. We may miss that DeMarco Murray is going to get such a heavy workload in the beginning. We may miss certain things like that. So I don't know that you can reliably count on in August that the strength of schedule for the first 4 to 6 weeks is going to be what you think it is. And that goes for the end. If you're trying to prioritize weeks 14 through 16, there's some question about that as well. I think it's much easier to do that after, when you start doing your buy low, sell high column and you're focusing on week 14 to 16, you're really not starting that process until week 3, 4, 5, 6, until you've got some data there. So that's the first concern I have. If you're saying I'm going to take a risk on guys that are less likely to be healthy in week 6 and beyond than before, then we start getting into an injury-prone conversation that I don't like to have about what makes a guy more likely to be injured in week 8 than week 2, and what percentage you're going to put on that. So that's a confounding issue for me. And I can see maybe what you decide to do is say, well, I'm going to focus on high floor players and not take a lot of risk in my draft and try to focus on players that I know that are going to put up, almost like a cash game DFS mentality. And the issue with that is if those high floor players have been good enough to get you to 5-0 and 6-1, then why are we trading them? So I think I have issues with anything that I think where we might say this is what I'm going to target as my first 6-week approach. I think you can tear those down a little bit. Not that it's not. I would like to be 5-1 or 6-0 after 6 weeks, but I wonder how you execute that strategy and execute it reliably.
Yeah, and it is what I had said on the show when David brought it up was we're all kind of football mad scientists, fantasy football mad scientists, and it at least gives you a chance to experiment and try these things. It's cool. Go ahead.
I love this, because it is fun, like you said. But to take Gene's point, it sounds a little bit like bad venture capitalists. It's like venture capitalists who are like, I go to I cover entrepreneurship a lot at the business school I work at, and it's like when you see things where it's like, well, what's the goal of this? The goal of this is to, as Joe Bryant talks about in Rails again sometimes, is to build up this. Idea and sell this company, but you don't have to live with the nightmare. You just sell the dream to somebody else to let them try and run it, because your whole purpose wasn't really to run it. Your whole purpose was just to make it appealing so someone else will buy it. Well, with all that hard work, why wouldn't you? The idea is, don't you want to build a good company that you can actually run? But again, there are points like, or just we do in corporate America, trying to make sure that the bottom line quarter to quarter is good. Let's not think about the long term. Let's just look at the short term quarter by quarter goals, because that seems to end up becoming more important than the actual overall mission, which was play to win the game, I think.
Yeah.
So I get that, but I like Gene's point there about the whole, well, if you're 5-1 or 6-0 with these players, why are you going to trade them?
Why would you mess with that?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I do like just the intuitive idea of weighting the earlier weeks heavier, because they give you more of a determinative look into how your player's season's going to go, and in general giving that more importance. But Jeff, we'll bring back Fiveish here. Jeff, just this idea of putting more importance on the early weeks, or even going to the extreme and drafting your team as if the season was only 6 weeks long. How does it strike you?
The first thought that I had when I heard you guys talking about that was kind of what Gene said, in the fact that regardless of how you chose to build it, whether you went after the high risk guy, hang on, bud. Sorry, it's my puppy.
Sure, sing the blues.
Exactly. Regardless of how you went about building the team, whether it was taking risks on guys that you thought were going to potentially get hurt later, and you were hoping to flip them before that happened, or you decided the other way with the low floor guys, if you were good enough, lucky enough, whatever term you want to use, to end 5-1 or 6-0, why jack with that? Why jeopardize going 0-8 from there on out? I understand that's not the idea. The idea isn't that you trade off these assets for nothing, but you've got something. So unless you did it the way that Gene described, where you took you took all calculated risks and they all pan for a month and a half. Okay, granted, I can see the panache of wanting to trade that off and strengthen your team, because you don't believe in that team. You took that many risks. You really don't on at the core level. You're really not believing in the team that much. But the other, if you do it the other way, and you took these bankable, for lack of a better term, players, and they're banking for you. It sounds like you'd just be kind of twiddling with the buttons to prove that you were smarter than the average bear. And maybe you are, but why push the envelope? Because it can backfire on you too. Because last year somebody could have tried to take those low risk bankable players and taken Brees, taken Adrian Peterson, taken who have you, and somebody else who took a shot on Murray, who going into last year was probably looked at as higher risk. It blew up. It blew up on him, and the guy who took Murray looked like a genius.
And we all know that making trades is more than just going, yeah, I'm just going to trade them.
Oh, totally.
You got to
Exactly.
email the guys. You
Exactly.
got to let them get back to
It's
you.
the worst.
You still have to go through like the 5 different stages of negotiation with
Totally.
if they even will engage you in that manner. And
well, and that's the thing. I mean, you can
Yeah.
because I mean, you guys play in just as many leagues as I do, probably way more. I mean, depending on which league we're talking about. I mean, I already know there are probably at least 3 to 4 guys in each league. It's a non-starter. It's a non-starter. I don't.
Sure.
What's the point? Because because they look at you as if you've ever won money in a particular league, if you're approaching them, there must be something wrong with your players that you're trying to move, or there's something about their players that they don't know about that you must, so they automatically increase in value, even though there may be nothing more than just you like that guy in college or something.
Unless you're playing the schedule to such a degree that you really feel like you've got the second half of the season schedule so locked down that you are making seemingly lopsided offers to your opponent, which I could see how David could be the type of guy to do that, to go where you look like, I'm offering you like 3 studs for like these 2 guys who are like meh players, and it turns around because of the schedule. But you have to be really confident in that, and that is a very high-risk strategy.
Right, and that's. I'm sorry to stomp on you, but I guess that's kind of what I was getting at. Is you have to really, if you're going to do it, you've got to be super like white hot intensity, 1,000 suns level confident.
Yeah.
Of your projections.
It's something you would do in a little wing of your laboratory. It's not, you wouldn't do these with your main teams. But I think you bring up a really good point, Jeff, about any plan like this, which is the trading part is so inexact. And even if you decide, I've done this in a few leagues this offseason where I thought, Kelvin Benjamin, I have a decent investment in dynasty leagues, and I want to move off of some of my Kelvin Benjamin positions right now while he has solidified himself as this potential number 1 for a long time. And I've had to settle for less than I wanted. But because you may have to accept 60 or 70% of what you really want. And the funny thing is, I should have taken up this subject earlier in the offseason, because there's a much nicer, large subject here of off-season trades. And in my experience, and I'll just go off on this tangent now, because we've covered the big news items for the last. We're going to just do an hour tonight. We'll be getting back to 2 hours as we get close to preseason and training camp coming here. I can't tell you how many times in dynasty leagues that I have had a resolute nature of, I'm going to trade this player, or I'm going to try to trade for this player. And I've backed off of trades because I feel like I'm not winning the trade. I'm not getting the value I want out of the trade. And of course, 2, 3, 4 weeks into the season, I'm like, why didn't I make that trade? Why didn't I follow through? Because the swings in value are much greater than we estimate in the nice, safe off-season when everything seems within the range of possibilities. So, Matt, you're nodding over there. What do you think about this general subject of trusting yourself and being willing to lose a trade now because in 3 or 4 months you'll clearly win it?
No, I mean, I think that if you believe strongly enough that you're going to be resolute with it, then you just kind of have to follow through and understand that you're going to have these emotional peaks and valleys with dealing with the other person, and that's just part of that negotiation process and wondering if it's all worth it. And I was going to kind of joke and add to this whole David's trade strategy, and I promise you this has nothing to do with David and how he works with us, but I have had a boss a time or two ago in my life who was loosely modeled from Steve Carell's character in The Office. So I could totally see how that if you are, and most of you don't realize this, but if you're a narcissistic employer in a fantasy league with a bunch of employees, this would be a perfect strategy for you, because you're going to be able to bully all your employees into making lopsided deals with you. So you should give this a try. But most of you probably don't realize you're narcissistic if you're doing that. But if you know that if you're a boss and you have an office league and you seem to win a lot and get the better end of the deals because you're so good at making deals, you should do that.
This is the classic going golfing with the boss. So, Gene, have you ever had that experience, though? What I'm talking about is, like, you feel like a player's value is overinflated that you have on your dynasty team, and you're trying to deal them, but the best deal you can get is like 70% of what you really think you should be able to get to them, but for them. But of course, when the season starts, they're worth like 30% of what they were worth in the offseason anyway, and you have to be willing to accept that to pocket the profit that your instincts are guiding you to.
I think everybody goes through that a little bit. I find that I have more trouble letting go of a player that I expect to finally, we talked about Mark Ingram and so many others over the years where it's harder for me to let go of a guy who I bought into from the beginning and I'm just waiting for things to break through. So yes, I tend to regret not trading players, but not because I had an offer on the table. It's because I didn't let myself believe that I should be considered trading them already. On the other hand, I'm much more likely to overpay for a player I like. I don't mind doing that at all. There's a running gag in one of my leagues that I will overpay for a quarterback. If I feel like, last year I was dealing top half of the first round picks for RG3, and I've traded crazy amounts for whatever it may be, just because you identified somebody that you think is going to pan out. And I would never shy away from throwing one more little piece onto the trade to make something done.
If you won't do that, then you don't really believe in the player, and that's a good way when someone approaches you about a trade to chisel a little more out of them. Although they can often win. It's funny, Gene, because you and I made a trade in Red Eye Masters. Oh, God, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago now, where I think we both were overpaying for a wide receiver we wanted.
Correct.
The trade was, and this is with salaries and contracts, so it's not as simple as I'm making it sound. I sent Gene Antonio Brown. This is oh my God, Antonio Brown. And Dwayne Bowe, when Dwayne Bowe was not a guy that we just, who's Dwayne Bowe? Who cares? And I got from you Des Bryant and Greg Little. And this is when we still thought, Greg Little, this is before we knew Greg Little was not going to amount to anything. And it's funny to look back on that trade, because if there's a trade that we both won, or at the very least we accomplished our objectives, that was one where we both overpaid and we both did all right in the trade. But it's fun. It's been fun being in leagues with, and Jeff too. It's been fun being in leagues with all y'all, because you get to know, as Matt was saying, the psychology of the other owners, and it's fun. Sometimes we step in it, sometimes we don't. Got just a couple of more minutes left here. I guess I'll touch on one thing, because there's more news coming out about the Detroit running back situation. So we'll toss this Detroit running back situation around, and then I'm going to get some beers and head over to La Quinta. And we're going to have an Audible. Well, I guess I should say, actually, before I do that, Jeff, unmute yourself, man, because here we are, again, one of our true Audible inner circle. But really, I want you all to feel like Jeff Rosenberger here is a stand-in for all of you, because there's so many people I could rattle off names right now. You know who you are. Emails, tweets, it's people that I went and had lunch with and beers with and things like that. So here you are, Jeff.
Here I am.
You've got Gene there, you've got Matt there, you've got me. No Cecil, though, and I do want to point out that Jeff said if he hadn't gotten in so late, Houston traffic, he was going to sport the Roadrunner fade. And if you even know what the Roadrunner fade means, and did you coin the Roadrunner fade? Did you coin that?
I did from back in the 5-minute drill days.
Yeah, so that tells you how integral Jeff Rosenberger is to the Audible. Like we use terms that he coined for us. So here you are, though. You're in the midst. Do you have anything to? You have a comment or a question or an admonition or this is it. The mic is yours.
How about a confession?
I feel like I should probably apologize to Gene.
There you go.
But we know that it's so insincere if I do it. You guys throw those softballs up on purpose. I swear.
Yeah.
I can't be blamed. I'm a weak individual. I'm not made out of wood. I'm not made out of wood, Gene. I do it from love. It all comes from love.
Oh, I don't mind. I'm eagerly awaiting the day a patient comes into my office and asks if I'm Chia Gene or any number of other things that are floating around associated with my name on Google.
I will say this. Of all the things that I have done with all of you guys, my favorite one is probably, it's not what you think. It's probably not what you think. Maybe it is. It's totally Bushwick Bramble. Bushwick Bramble is still my favorite one. That was still the one that was the most fun to do. The Cecil Love Enforcer is a close second.
Yeah.
But Bushwick Bramble
I
is
think that's
always
my
going to be my favorite.
Bushwick Bramble it works on so many levels.
It does.
It really does. And Bushwick Bill is around Austin a lot on the
Really?
music here. Yeah, he just kind of shows up, and he loves music. He loves making music. He loves collaborating with people. And he won't just show up at hip hop shows. He'll show up at a lot. He's a great guy. Everybody loves him. So Bushwick Bill is not a bad guy to be associated with. But I do love that Gene, when you said, I love that your mind went first to apologizing to Gene. And Gene in classic, like 95% joking, 5% serious. There you go. This is your chance. It's beautiful. But this is, again, I want to take this moment out. And, of course, animals are always welcome. Mazook, rest in peace. And now we have. I noticed that what's your dog's name?
Zook's no longer with us. Oh, that bums me out, man.
Yeah, he went on.
That bums me out.
Yeah. So, but we have. What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Millhouse.
Millhouse. We brought up Millhouse came up and nuzzled with you during the Lattimore talk. So maybe Millhouse is like part of the training staff and rehab or something like that. How's he been in the car?
He loves the car, so he's been fantastic. Now this trip, he's big King Dingling. What are you talking about? We like rented a 4Runner, so he's got like this giant back seat with a padded cover and a hammock. He's sleeping.
Yeah,
he's
more
learning
comfortable
to
than
drive.
humans.
Damn right he is. Yeah.
Good Millhouse. Make sure they continue to serve you.
There
okay. So we got an hour in. Cecil will be back next week. We'll all be back next week. Things are getting back to normal, and it's been my great pleasure, as always, to get to drive, but especially to have the opportunity to bring in Fiveish and to hang out with Fiveish. And that should be also a notice to all of y'all out there. I love hearing from people when you're passing through Austin. I try to do everything I can anytime I can get together with any of y'all, because this is one of the greatest joys and gifts from this show that we're going on the 10th year now. Go ahead.
I have to interrupt. Now, if any of you would like to get revenge on behalf of Gene Bramall on Fiveish, I think that we can do a Walking Dead piece with Mr. Rick Grimes over here. So I would definitely recommend, if any of you have those graphic design skills, that you should be looking them up, and we could do one with Fiveish right here and turn the tables. Absolutely. So revenge Samuel L. Jackson.
I can. See now it
was a Trojan horse. It was a Trojan.
Has to be done.
It appeared to be some compassion for Gene, and then at the end,
it has to be done. It has to be done.
You don't think I would rather see my likeness as Samuel L. Jackson than he did?
I kind of thought Gene looked like Samuel L. Jackson. That was kind of the thing. It kind of had the green Jerry curl and the goatee going.
I don't think there's anything green about
what would you prefer then, Gene? Would you prefer Snakes on a Plane era or
Pulp Fiction era?
Pulp Fiction.
Okay, fair enough.
Well,
Like the Moon era.
Folks, the Audible.
Say what again?
The Audible does actually taste like pumpkin pie, and you will find out by listening to it every week, watching it. It's terrific though. It's a great joy to be able to be part of this community, and it's really fun to bring in someone like Jeff, who has been part of the ride basically all along, and really to the point where, again, like, it's the language we use about the Audible are, some of the great pictures that will live on, and it will live on. And this is why Gene has that bittersweet sort of I'm joking but I'm not joking. It's like the evidence of our existence hundreds of years or thousands of years from now is going to be this stuff. So, and you help us, encourage us, like Jeff always does. Thank you, folks, for doing that with us. Thank you for always staying classy, and we'll be back at you real soon. And